Hello, I'm Tag.
And this is Bob.
And you're listening to Bob and Tag Talk. Before we start the show, I'd like to point out that the topics discussed on Bob and Tag Talk are for informational purposes only. So please don't take this as investment advice. We urge you to do your own research before making any investment. Today we're going to talk about capitalism. What is capitalism? What are the merits, demerits, and what happens as a consequence of capitalism? So what is capitalism?
So capitalism is kind of a principle or a philosophy. So it can be used as basis for a government or an economy, or it can also be used for establishing markets and so on. So generally, when you say capitalism, it means that we are trying to create a large capital, and then trying to use that capital in efficient and productive ways.
Right.
So that the end goal is to make a profit which can be beneficial to all the shareholders.
Okay, so profit is the main goal in capitalism.
Profit is the incentive. So the whole incentive of setting up capitalism is that people who are participating in the capitalistic economy or the markets or a business, they have the incentive so that they can, if they make profits, they can, the profits is for them.
Right, the profits are for them, and that's how they survive in the economy.
Yeah.
As in, the more profits you make, the better your chances for survival in the economy?
Not necessarily. So the more profits you make, the more you can be wealthy.
Okay.
So there is no upper limit for the amount of wealth that you can hold in capitalism.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So what about free markets in the realm of capitalism?
So in free markets are basically a kind of a separate concept. So free markets can be there in capitalism and communism as well.
Okay.
So at the end of free market is basically the implementation of free market is like different countries which are participating in the global economy can trade freely without any restrictions on how much they can trade, how much they can do in export, and how much they can do in import.
Okay.
So there are no restrictions or rules, more relaxed rules for trading.
Okay. So if a lot of countries use capitalism, they can trade more freely because
even communist countries can trade with capitalistic countries. There are no restrictions as such. Free market is where you don't create some laws that restrict trading.
Oh, okay, that's it. That's what.
Restriction is very limited. It's more relaxed.
Okay.
So any company, any business that you can create can freely trade with any other company in a different country.
All right. Okay. So I understand the basics of capitalism. Profit is the main game, and you can accrue as much wealth as you can with whatever processes you do. So what else is important in capitalism?
In capitalism, again, the most important thing is about the process. The important thing in the process is productivity and efficiency. So why capitalism works in today's, at least in the last 100 years, is because the incentive of the employee or even the business owner is to to hoard as much wealth as possible.
Okay.
So you're allowing them to create as much wealth, not just for yourself. When you create more wealth for yourself, you also create more wealth for your employees, and eventually it trickles down. It's a trickle-down economy.
Okay.
So eventually it trickles down to your subsidiaries or to your suppliers.
Right.
Or to other people who you are buying and selling with, trading with. So the wealth is eventually seeping down to multiple layers of the economy.
So that is called trickle-down economics.
Trickle-down
As
economics.
in, like when the wealth seeps down from the top to the bottom.
Yes.
So obviously let's say the CEO holds the most wealth, but then eventually
not the CEO, the business owner.
So but eventually that wealth will branch down and keep branching down till they reach the employees.
Yeah, correct. Employees also will buy houses. They will buy consumable goods,
right,
and then discretionary products and so on. And eventually the economy benefits.
Right.
It's the trickle down of the money.
Okay. So in capitalism, there is an incentive for profit, and there's also an incentive for companies to keep growing and growing, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
So if we take the example of in the last 2 decades, you can see the size of Google, Microsoft, and then even Apple. So 2 decades ago, they were very small companies, or they were not as big as such. 2 decades ago, the bigger companies were oil companies, or resource-based companies. The companies which are extracting oil, which are extracting coal, and so on. So now, with these kind of software-based companies, they're just growing and growing, and they keep growing larger.
Right.
So there is no limit to how much big they can become.
Right.
And because the whole concept of why they are growing is because of the scale. So they are able to, the same number of employees, they can deliver more products, more different kind of product. They can do more sales, and they can generate more revenue. But when it comes to like automobile companies or industrial economies, for example, like Ford was one of the first. You can say they have the concept of manufacturing, and then the manufacturing they introduced for making cars. So it totally depends on resources. They need steel, they need all metals, they need labor, and then they have this line-based industrial machinery and so on. So they cannot scale. They can only scale as much as possible. It depends on the number of resources, depends on the number of employees, and then depends on how much people are ready to buy.
So that companies like Ford, automobile companies, would also be considered, into the economies of scale. Economies of scale
is just an idea. So basically, if you want to make more profits, you have to make more. You have to make. You have to go to different cities. You have to go to different towns. You need more people to buy your product. So the way automobile companies do it is they set up factories in different places. So they need to buy land. They need to build factories. They need to build the machineries, and then they need to train their people, and then eventually they become efficient, and that's when they generate more profits.
And economies of scale is a consequence of capitalism, no?
No, economies of scale is possible both in communism and capitalism.
Okay.
There is no restriction that can only happen in capitalism.
Okay.
At the end of the day, scale is something like you have a good idea, you are becoming profitable. If you want to increase profits, you have to multiply that whatever your inputs and your process into different areas, different parts of the country or different parts of the globe and so on. That is the only way that we can make profits. For software companies, it is much easier.
Yeah, because obviously software...
the labor requirement is very low.
Right.
And there is no kind of requirement of raw materials as such.
Yeah.
So all about skill.
So
and
as
then,
long as
and then technology is always enables you to scale to larger number of viewers or consumers and so on. And mainly the primary capitalist economies are larger economies are like democratic countries today. So mainly America, US is one of the largest economies in the world, and then we have European economies and then UK economies. So the whole idea of capitalism in these kind of economies is the government allows you to set up a business, and then allows you to buy some land, and then probably hire some employees, and then create a product or a service, and then eventually you actually provide good service or a better service, and then you create better profits.
Right.
And then you take most of your profits. So what the government gets is they probably tax the profits.
Right.
If you make a loss, they don't tax you.
Okay.
As you make a profit, probably they set the corporate tax slabs or levels, like 20% or 15%, 25%, whatever they set. And then each of the countries governments also can benefit from the profits that the individual companies make.
Okay.
And then the whole idea is as the companies are encouraged to make more profits, and then the companies are also encouraged to make investments. Okay. Like, for example, let's say all the profits that they make, they can buy more land, they can make more factories, they can employ more people. So eventually the economies get better. And this is all tracked in the gross domestic product of the actual, that is one metric for tracking the economy.
Right. As you allow more and more companies
people to get
join.
employed, people to get better paid and so on. But the other thing is, one of the other ways that businesses can derive maximum profit is to keep their costs low. So the different ways is like you either scale, you create more companies, or you sell more and so on, or you keep your labor costs low, you keep your raw material costs low and so on.
Makes sense.
So you basically, if your costs and expenses are low, and that is another way of maximizing your profits.
Yeah, it makes sense, no? Because sometimes you want to find vendors who will sell something to you in bulk for a cheaper rate. Let's say raw materials, you're buying rice or whatever it is. You want to find the cheapest rate possible.
Yeah. That is the whole idea of a capitalistic economy.
Okay.
So you try to make basically people who are efficient can actually produce more value with the least amount of resources consumed.
Okay.
So that is how any business becomes profitable. So as all different piece of businesses who are depending on each other become more efficient, more productive, the labor requirement goes low. At the same time, there is also alternative way of increasing profits is through industrialization or through automation.
Okay.
So human beings have to be paid. For example, they need to be given a minimum wage. They need to be given some health benefits, some kind of retirement benefits, or any other benefits that needs to be. But machines don't require. Machines are like one-time investment, and all these kind of recurring investment is reduced. So that is one way for companies to actually increase their profits, to decrease their costs by less human deployment or training and so on.
Okay. So you mentioned automation and industrialization. So automation, I understand. You invest in a lot of robot related, basically less human related.
Any machinery, So for example, initially to make cars, they were hiring 10,000 people. Now they hire only 500 people and so on. But the 500 people operate machines.
Right.
So basically the government role is to set the minimum wage and basically to set the benefits in such a way so that and also probably to retrain the employees. Probably the technology is something that keeps changing, so people have to be retrained constantly. So the businesses don't necessarily take up all the impetus to train people. So as in the best people, the most knowledgeable or most skilled people are who are employed. So it's up to the government to actually take care of the unskilled people.
Unskilled. Okay.
So capitalistic economies have a little bit of a challenge. How do we create or how do we transfer skills or how do we improve the unskilled people? And then most of the agricultural education and then any kind of medical and all the economies, they don't really work well in capitalist economies. There are always a lot of challenges because the cost is always increasing because it's all human related.
Yeah, you can't really even... Okay, so in terms of education, let's say there's more and more e-learning that is coming into the picture.
That is one way. Again, technology is again increasing. So one person can teach 1,000 people compared to 30 or 40 people. But the thing is, the number of teachers employed will go away. The number of, for example, using machines, one person can provide a better yield in farms. And the amount of harvest that he can do with machines is much higher compared to the humans which can be done. So there will be less number of people required in agriculture.
Yeah. So right now, even with all of the technology advancements that we made in education, agriculture, whatever it is still more expensive to maintain those venues, those avenues.
The challenge is not to maintain those kind of industries. The challenge is to support employment.
Okay.
So how do you keep people employed? If people are not employed, government has to give subsidies to them.
Okay, but why is it that you say that it is not advantageous in a capitalistic economy? That is, why are education and agriculture some areas where it cannot thrive in a capitalistic environment?
So it depends on the quality. So basically, you may probably get, for example, when it comes to agriculture, right? So you may be able to grow a lot of corn in a particular acres of hectares of land. The thing is, the crop that is chosen is always more efficient and productive. So, for example, corn is like very cheap to produce.
Okay.
And what is the food that you get from corn? You get corn syrup, you get
corn flour,
corn oil, anything like that, flour and so on. And these kind of foods are not really good for human beings.
Okay.
So the more healthier, basically, businesses, capitalistic business will not choose healthier choices.
Okay,
So
okay.
the crops that are chosen, the way they are actually, they may use a lot of fertilizers, and
Right.
then they may not be healthy. So
Okay,
the
I
foods that
see.
they bring, so eventually that affects the population, and that eventually affects the health, and it also affects the cost of medicine, and then cost
Okay.
of sustainment of healthcare and so on.
I see what you mean, because these are all cheap ingredients.
Hmm.
So just because they're cheap, if we keep on using them, it's not going to improve the health at all.
Yes.
So in agriculture, you will need to use more expensive stuff,
Yeah.
and they're expensive for a reason, and you can't compromise on that cost,
Yes.
because those are very necessary raw
What is
materials.
healthy may not be cheap.
Right, and they cannot be replaced, and they're extremely necessary.
Yeah.
And okay, I understand that in terms of agriculture. What about education? E-learning, I get it. It's still a very new concept
Yeah.
right now. But how is it that it does not function very well in a
So, for
capitalistic?
example, teaching kids, cannot be done. I mean, at least for now, it cannot be done by robots. So it needs to be. You need to hire a lot of teachers. You need to hire a lot of healthcare workers or whatever education-related workers, and then they need to be paid. Humans always need to be paid highly.
Yes.
So the amount of money that you put into education will not be always efficiently utilized. There will always be a lot of at least for capitalistic business, there will always be wastages.
Right, especially when there's human error and everything
Human
involved.
error involved.
Oh, okay.
And then you have to be basically, how do you make people employable? What kind of education do you give them? And those kind of things are always
Right. So
difficult.
in education, you will have to take care of the cost of training those teachers, employing good teachers, and
And providing them, for example, if teachers are paid low,
right.
then teachers will not come for this particular
Exactly.
profession. They will move to something higher paying professions. So how do you actually that's the main challenge of education. So how do you retain good people and well-skilled people and so on?
And now I understand that it's probably the same thing with medicine also. You will need to invest in good
Good training and so on.
good equipment to make all of them, and
They are not necessarily cheap.
Yeah.
And equipments are you can always make in cheap. As you make more, you can probably sell for cheaper.
Yeah, but
So,
again, teaching the
skills is the most difficult part.
Okay. No, I understand. So what are the other demerits in capitalism? I understand that all of education, agriculture, medicine does not work very well. What are the other demerits?
So one of the things that is happening currently is basically the whole point is minimum wage of an employee. So people will need to be paid at least a little bit of a good wage so that they can sustain their lives.
Yeah, makes sense.
So you need employees for any company. So but the whole concept of a business is to pay the employees as less as possible and to get maximum work out of them as possible.
Yeah, so that seems contradictory.
So the thing is, the challenge is generally what laborers can do is they can form unions so that they can probably negotiate a better working conditions, better pay, and whatever they can want with the businesses.
Okay.
But generally in capitalistic economies like US, unions are discouraged. So unionization is allowed, but they are generally discouraged, and generally the very long running unions are mainly on farming related or agriculture related. They're not very nowadays Amazon employees are probably planning to get unionized.
Right.
Uber employees are planning to get unionized because they are not getting, their wages are very low, and they will not be getting as much health benefits or any other benefits, so that the living wage is really not really good. That's their main issue.
So who discourages unionization? The companies themselves?
Not just companies themselves. I mean, companies don't get any benefit from unionization.
Makes sense.
So but the US government itself doesn't support unionization.
Why?
The laws are set up in such a way that they are capitalistic economies.
Okay.
So they don't generally really support.
What about India then?
So India is not exactly completely capitalistic. So they're a mix of socialism and capitalism. So we depend on subsidies, and then so when you say subsidies will always go generally for unskilled people who are really struggling to be part of the efficient and productive economy. So generally they need to be trained. If you're not able to train them, at least you need to give them a subsidy so that they are able to live.
Okay.
So that's the socialism part of it.
Okay. One demerit is that labor what are
And
other ones?
some other things, like for example, any kind of industry which is very heavily regulated eventually will turn into a monopoly or a duopoly. So there is not much competition.
Right.
So for example, in the telecom industry, for example, now all the telecom industries are merging with each other. Now we only have Airtel, Reliance, and then Vodafone. Eventually Vodafone and Idea got merged, and we had about 10 different telecom service providers. Now we have only 3. Eventually, if it becomes 2, it becomes a duopoly.
Right.
So that means they set the price.
Right.
They can create as much profit as they want.
Yeah.
If there is no competition, there is no one to reduce the price.
Okay, so they can go as high as they want.
Yeah, they can. So power companies are something like also that way. Generally, power companies can be monopoly or duopolies, and then so they have the right to set up the charges or how much consumers pay.
Yeah, and we can't really do anything about it also because
these are necessary utilities and telephony utilities or some kind of power utilities. Monopolies and duopolies are very, very bad for the consumers.
Right.
So that's why all the governments usually set up this antitrust and then anti-competitive legislations.
Okay.
So that to discourage these kind of monopolist and duopoly kind of setups and price fixing and so on.
Okay. But even then, there is a chance for monopolies, duopolies to happen.
Eventually happen because it is too expensive for a new company to get started in that particular industry.
Yeah, because everything is owned by the major players.
Yeah, and then if you want, for example, if someone new has to come up in power generation, a private company has to come up, the amount of capital they need to raise to set up factories, to set up industries, to hire people is too huge. So no one will be willing to make that kind of investment as long as from day one do they get profitable.
Okay.
So this is where the government and then private industry probably some cases it is very, very difficult to avoid duopolies or at least more to increase more competition.
Okay.
So government policies are very important in those cases.
Understood. So you mentioned that companies tend to reduce labor costs. That is their incentive to reduce the labor costs as much as possible. So you said that they would try to find the most cheapest solutions.
Yes.
So what are some ways by which they find the cheapest solutions to labor cost issues?
So that happens, I mean, at least in the textile economies, initially we always go to the cheapest labor. If you want to go to Asian countries, we always will get cheaper labor. So for example, even if you take Apple, most of the manufacturing of Apple is based in China. Why? Because the cost of making a particular handset or a product is very, very cheap. And then some textiles and all are mainly made in India or Bangladesh or Vietnam and Asian economies. But Asian economies benefit from that because their people earn a little bit more compared to their local economies if they went to a job. Because of globalization, they are able to earn more.
Yeah, the import export.
Yeah, but the thing is, employees or workers in US, in UK, they will not go to those kind of jobs because they can't work on the same wage as people in Bangladesh, India, Vietnam, and so on. They need a higher wage because their living standards are very much high, and then their cost of living is high, so they can't go to those kind of jobs.
They can't survive on those.
Those. So that's why eventually companies will outsource most of the things. So they'll always outsource to the cheapest worker.
Okay, makes sense. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about capitalism?
I mean, capitalism has been really successful, but there are always a lot of challenges that we are encountering, and then a lot of controversies. So there are always some governments which are leaning towards socialism. Probably they lean towards providing better health benefits, providing better, kind of subsidies,
education.
Not just for education, but also for kids, families. They provide some kind of a subsidy, either subsidy by food or subsidy by mainly gas, oil and so on. Oil subsidies are always given. And agricultural subsidies are also high for all economies. And for subsidies for fertilizers, and if you employ a lot of more people in agriculture, the government will also subsidize, and then so on. So in those cases, they are still prevalent. Subsidies are still prevalent. So 100% capitalist economies we definitely don't see in the world.
Right.
But capitalism has been successful in raising the living wage for people and providing better, systems, better products, better services, and so on.
So, in general, what is the difference between capitalism and socialism?
Socialism is for the betterment of people. It focuses on betterment of people. Capitalism on betterment of profits, or betterment of systems that provide more profits, more efficiency, more productivity.
Okay.
Communism is it's a more extreme case of socialism where everything is common to the people. There is no private enterprise.
Right.
No one can own anything.
So private. China is a communist.
China is one of the most successful communist economies.
Okay.
So they are communist. They have a communist government. They don't have a democracy. And for example, the land belongs to the people or to the government. Okay. So the company cannot go there and buy land.
Okay.
They can only lease a land and then set up a factory.
Right.
So eventually they'll have to pay the government a fee for using that particular land. Because the resources belong to the people. But here in capitalist economy, resources can be privatized.
Okay.
So you can put up a bid and then you can take up a gold mine. And then all you have to do is pay tax to the government for for extracting gold, and you sell the gold and then you hire more employees. It's a capitalist economy.
Right.
But in China or in other communist economies, the gold belongs to the government, belongs to the people. So it's up to the government or whatever the gold you extract, it goes to the government or the people.
So let's say you've discovered a mine or whatever it is, it'll immediately go to the government, is it?
Yes. In a communist economy, resources belong to the people.
Okay.
That's the main difference.
Interesting. So today we talked about capitalism, what are its merits, what happens as a consequence of capitalism, what are the disadvantages, and the problem areas where capitalism cannot succeed, but has problems in the areas of education, agriculture and medicine. And we briefly touched upon what is socialism and communism, and I think that's a good spot to end it there today. Hey, thanks for listening to Bob and Tag Talk. Please consider following us on our Instagram and Facebook pages. We put out weekly summaries of the topics discussed on the podcast. And if you found this episode informative, please like, share and subscribe.